Hi, I'm Dolly Basta, and welcome back to Dolly's World. You know, I had done some pieces for this week in East Brunswick with Mike Rutowski at Ferris Farms, and when we looked at all the pieces that were done, I thought, gee, we'll only be showing them once on This Week in East Brunswick. How about if I use them for one of my shows? Just think you can keep it for posterity. And besides, it's so much fun to learn about how to take care of the earth and the environment. So sit down, take a look. So Mike, why don't we start with bringing in your indoor plants and what you have to do, because you can't just drag them in, correct?
Sure, Dolly. In fact, a lot of people, it's early September right now, a lot of people come in November. A lot of people come in the spring and say, boy, you know, I put my house plants out for the summer. They did tremendous. They got big, they got full, but I wound up throwing most of them away because I had insect problems. I had infestations that I just couldn't get rid of. And a lot of that could be easily alleviated by learning how to winterize your plants, how to take care of them just before you're ready to bring them in for the winter.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave it to you then.
Okay, well, what we have here, it's not your everyday house plant. This is a tropical hibiscus. I wish there were some flowers on it. This is a plant that all summer, in the heat of the summer, a good sunny spot, it gets these really big, nice, colorful flowers that pretty much the whole season. A lot of people like to bring them in for the winter time, but outside they do fine, very little insect problems, but insects do tend to live on this plant, and when you try to bring it in for the winter, you're just creating a whole host of problems because of what you're dragging indoors with this plant. First thing I like to do, and it's very easily done, is just to rinse the plant off. You want to get your trusty garden hose, and all I have on this is just a hose fitting, a turn-off that's going to give me a lot of water pressure. Basically, what I'm going to do is just blast the plant with a stream of water. The easiest way to get rid of insects, if you can, is just to wash them off, and you should do this with all your house plants. I'm going to try not to get you wet, but basically I'm just going to take the plant outside. You do not want to do this inside. Your wife will not appreciate it if you do it inside. Take it outside on the lawn, any place, and just actually turn the plant over, turn the water on, and really give it a good hose and just really rinse those leaves off as best as you can. You want to rinse off the top leaves, but you see I'm flipping it over. The bottom is where most of the insects tend to congregate anyway. So that's where you really want to do. So you really want to hose it off really, really good. And once you do that, let the plant dry. Okay, now you're ready to do the next step. We don't usually advocate using too many insecticides here, only if you need them. But if you try to do something as a preventative that's really going to save your other house plants as well as this one, you do want to kind of do something preemptively. You do want to kind of make sure there's you really want to try to control anything that's on them. So by rinsing them off, you've pretty much knocked off all the adults. If there's any aphids, white flies, or anything, a lot of times once you knock them off, they won't come back on. But the one thing you don't see on this plant, there's probably thousands of insect eggs on the plant. Now, normally if it's outside, other insects tend to eat those eggs. If you have ladybugs, other types of things will keep the insects under control. But when you bring this plant inside the house, there's no predator insects really to work on them, so you really have to try to control the eggs and the newer insects that are going to form, the ones that we didn't wash off. So the first thing we're going to try to use would be, if you're organic, you want to use something that's kind of safe. There's a lot of different types of insecticides on the market. This is something that has oils in it. It has pyrethrins and oil, which is safe for most people, but it's kind of deadly on insects. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use it always according to the directions, but once this plant thoroughly dries, you're going to want to spray the leaves as thoroughly as possible. And that coverage is very important, because if you miss a spot, you're not going to control the insects. Again, that's if you want to do it organically. If you want to do it use something a little more stronger, although it's not organic, you use a chemical it's a combination of an actual insecticide and something that's systemic. Now, when I use the word systemic, we always use that word a lot, and I think everybody knows what it means. Actually, what that means, you always want to check the label if you're using an insecticide. If it's a systemic, that means that when you spray it on the leaves, it actually penetrates and actually goes into the leaves. And if the insects feed on it at any point, they'll wind up killing them for usually a 2 or 3 week period. That's why systemics are a lot better, a lot more effective at controlling insects than just a topical spray that kind of kills them just on contact. So I usually recommend, if you don't mind using insecticides, use something that's systemic. spray it on thoroughly. Now this one you only have to use maybe once every 2 weeks, so you're going to spray maybe once in early September, and then maybe once about the middle of September, and that'll pretty much wind up taking care of all the insect problems on your plants. And there's all kinds of insecticides. We're not advocating any certain type. Just make sure what you're using can be used on the type of plant that you're intending on using it on. The one last thing I want to say is once you've totally cleaned up your plant, you've rinsed it off, you've been spraying once a week or once every 2 weeks with an insecticide, the last step, since you really don't want to have to spray your plants inside the house, and it's a very handy little thing to use, there are chemicals that are systemic granules, and they're very easily applied. It's a granule that you apply to the surface of the soil. You have to use it according to the directions. In this case, for this type of a plant, we needed about, I think, about 4 or 5 tablespoons. And it's a granule, and all you're going to do is take it and actually sprinkle it on the surface of the soil. All right, we're going to sprinkle it on the surface of the soil, and then I'm going to water that very thoroughly. And that's a systemic that works through the root system. So it's going to penetrate, get into the soil, and then as those roots absorb the chemical, it's going to work its way up into the plant, and it's pretty much going to protect you for the rest of the winter to make sure that you're insect-free for the rest of the winter. And I would do that on all your house plants except for if you're trying to bring anything edible in. You never want to use systemics on anything edible since it's going right into the plant and into the leaves, and you don't want to be eating what you're using to control insects.
I think one word of warning is really important here when you start using things like this, is to really follow the directions.
Oh, yeah.
Because I have heard people say, well, I thought if a little does that, if I dump half a jar in, I'm being facetious now, but if I use more, it'll work better. And that's not true.
No, nothing could be further than the truth. The manufacturers that make a lot of these chemicals, most of the money is not made in developing the chemical. Most of the money is made in research and how it works and putting that label on the container. So reading the label, which most people don't want to do, they just want to grab it and start using it. We always recommend that you read the label, and exactly, they think, well, if I use this amount, it's going to work twice as good if I put double on. A lot of times it can be toxic, and it can actually hurt the plant. That happens with fertilizers a lot. It can happen with insecticides if you use too much of anything.
Very good. Okay, I guess, folks, we're going on to the next one. And I think this week we're going to discuss dividing perennials. Now let's face it, all of us have been growing these maybe 2 or 3 summers, and they're beginning to really get very full, and believe it or not, you can have extra plants. So Mike is going to tell us today what we can divide, what we can't divide, and just a general lesson in how to take care of these perennials over the winter. So as I said before, Michael, take it away.
Okay, Doc. Well, again, it's early fall. Now's a great time to split your perennials. Just in case for anybody that doesn't know, a perennial is the plant that comes back year after year. It totally dies back every year, and it resprouts. And usually when it sprouts, it'll kind of keep doubling in size. And some of your perennials, as an example, like mountain pinks, and we have iris right here. The clumps can get fairly large. Now, some people want large clumps, and sometimes certain things like hostas, sometimes you're better off not really wrecking them by or digging them up and splitting them apart. Sometimes they look pretty impressive that way. But some plants, as they get too full and too dense, actually will stop flowering. Daylilies are that way. There's a lot of other plants that way. And sometimes you just want to spread some plants, more plants around your property, and rather than go into a garden center and buying new ones, if you have a big clump of something and you're feeling very, very generous, you want to give your neighbors some or some of your relatives some, fall is just a really good time to start digging those up, breaking them apart without any problem, replanting them, and you start off with a whole brand new plant that'll keep enlarging year after year.
Why is it better to do this in fall than spring?
It's better to do for most plants in the fall, mostly because we just went through a real good growth spurt in the summer. The plants have a nice, healthy root system, good leaves on them. And if you divide them now, before it gets too cold, and replant them with the cool weather, the nice cool weather we have in the fall, the roots just gives them plenty of time to root in. If you try doing this in the middle of the summertime, it is possible, but you notice this past summer how hot it was. If you divided something and it got really hot, doesn't have a good enough root system on it, it could dehydrate pretty quick and die, or just perform very poorly. So fall is real good time for digging them up, mostly because the weather is very conducive to the plant rooting in really well. We took this plant out, and basically all you have to do is, if you can see where the root system is and follow the stems in, you just kind of split this thing apart. Now sometimes you have to use, actually I'm going to use a little handsaw here, but if you can get in between the plant, I'm just going to actually kind of saw through here.
Watch your hand.
Yeah, I'm watching.
I didn't bring any Band-Aids with me today.
And I'm just going to break this thing right in half. And you notice, right, this has roots on it, this has roots on it. If I plant this fall, this probably in the ground will be 2 or 3 times the size of this plant that we're actually uprooting right now. So I could actually split this into 2 or 3. If I was willing to wait like an extra year, I could probably even get 5 or 6 plants out of here and let them grow for a year, and then they'd be full size by the second year.
And that will really fill out again the next year like this was.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's just as simple as splitting them in half, not being afraid and just trying it. Now these irises are usually planted by, we usually get them in their small clumps. Now this was one plant, and it's been in here just for one season. You could see how this plant has split and regenerated, and if I'm going to turn it over towards the camera, I'm not sure if you could see it. Maybe probably in here you could see it, but there's actually probably 7 or 8 small individual plants that have split off the mother plant. And all you have to do in this case is actually just kind of break those apart, and each one of these little pieces will grow into a clump this big for next year. So I'll just try doing that right now. I'm just going to kind of reach in there, just kind of try to get my hand into this soil here. Or I could use my saw, but I'm just going to do it this way, and I'm just going to rip this right out. See, I ripped it apart, but now this is like a small clump. I can actually get 3 more, I could divide this, and get 3 more plants.
Division.
And then you would just plant it. When you replanted it, you would go into your garden, good well-drained area, plant it at about the same level as it was taken out of the soil. You don't want to plant it too deep. If you plant it, if the soil level's up this high, then this may rot on you. So you always want to plant stuff at about the same exact level as you took them out of the ground. These are actually called herbaceous perennials, which means they totally die back to the ground. A lot of things we grow as perennials don't die back. As an example, this is a butterfly bush. Very, very popular plant, really good for sunny areas. Butterflies do love them, but they don't totally die back. And people are always asking, how do we take care of these for the wintertime? Now, it's not the wintertime yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to let the leaves totally fall off. And for some reason, these type of plants survive the winter better with all their stems intact. Now, the leaves, I would definitely get rid of the leaves. You want to collect all the leaves. Same thing, throw them in your compost pile. Totally get rid of them off the property. But you're going to leave these things out there sticking up like a sore thumb, because they're just going to survive the winter better for you. But now next spring, when next spring comes and it's about, say, early April, maybe the end of March, a nice warm day, then you're going to actually prune them back. You're going to probably cut them back to about maybe about a foot tall, say something like this. Seems a little.
That's quite a bit then.
Seems drastic, and some people think, oh man, you're wrecking your plant.
No,
but
they grow fast.
Well, what's going to happen? It's spring now, and this plant's going to start growing again, and all the nutrients are going to come from the root system up into these stems, and you can't really see them, but there's a bunch of dormant buds in here. All of a sudden, all these new buds are going to pop, and then all these new shoots are going to come out, and that's when you fertilize them, and it's going to be the same thing with a Caryopteris. In fact, what we do then is, after the new shoots come out, we even clip them back lightly again, and that gives you a real full dense plant that really just blooms for you all summer and pretty much into the early fall. But these are the only exceptions to as far as cutting back totally the perennials. We don't want to do anything that's woody and stemmy. Pretty much anything that looks like it dies back.
I have learned so much. I thought I knew a great deal, but I have really learned a lot from this piece we did, Mike. But there's still one thing left, and you know what it is? Yep, you're looking at it from the window. Your lawn. To fertilize or not to fertilize? That is the question. And Mike, you're going to answer it.
Yeah. We get that question constantly. When's the best time to fertilize? I mean, if you go by what the fertilizer manufacturers say, they'll have you fertilizing 5 or 6 times a year. Now they have summer fertilizers. They just have you fertilizing constantly. You don't really need to. The most important thing is that you do fertilize at the right time. And fall is really the best time to fertilize, because a lot of people don't realize, but your grass and your turf grass grows totally different in the fall than it does in the spring. When you fertilize in the spring, yeah, it does green the grass up and it grows real quick, but all that energy basically is going into the leaves, and that's what you're doing. You're growing that grass and it's growing it quick, and you're getting very little root development. That's just the way grass grows in the spring. In the fall, grass grows differently, and it all has to do with the cooling of the temperatures, and it has to do with day length. As the nights get longer and the days get shorter, it signals the grass to grow in a different type of growth phase. And actually, a lot of the energy, rather than going into making all this grass that you have to cut, actually goes into thickening the lawn up. Actually, most grasses have things called rhizomes, which are like roots that grow sideways and they pop up new grass. That's when most of the rhizomes are going to grow and really do well is in the fall. And that's why it's very important to fertilize at that time, because just like us, when we're hungry, if you want to grow when you're a young kid, you give the kid proper nutrition. Same thing with grass. You have to do exactly the same thing. And there's been a lot of myths about the things that people used to do 20, 30 years ago that really aren't true, and that's what I'm hoping to kind of show you today, is what you should be using and what you shouldn't be using.
Okay, let's get going.
Well, it's early September here. We just had a real good rain. Now the grass is going to go into another growth spurt. Now's the best time to fertilize. You want to use a high nitrogen fertilizer. Now what does that mean? There's 3 numbers on a bag of fertilizer. The first number is the nitrogen. The higher the percentage, the stronger it is. And what you want to look at is the ratio. This is a 24:3:12, all right? This is a totally different fertilizer. This is a 10:6:4. This actually has more nitrogen in it, this bag, even though it's a lower number than this. And again, without getting too complicated, but the first number is the percentage of nitrogen by weight. So if you look at the percentage, as an example, this one is a 2603 of actual nitrogen. I think there's about 3.7 pounds because it's 26%, and the weight of this bag I think is about 14 or 15 pounds. So there's only about 3.5 pounds of nitrogen in here. This is a 10.64, and it actually has more nitrogen. It has 5 pounds because it's 10%, but it's a 50-pound bag. So you got to be an educated consumer. You got to look at not only how strong it is, how big of a bag it is, but the most important thing is you want a lot of nitrogen. The old timers years ago, they used to come in the fall and, I want a high phosphorus fertilizer. That's the middle number. You'll notice that on these bags, there's 0 in this one, and there's only 3% in that. Phosphorus, it's a necessary nutrient, but the grass, usually if you've been fertilizing, it really doesn't need it that much. There's enough in the soil, it's very stable, and it stays there. But the nitrogen gets all used up. So we got to use nitrogen, and I would recommend fertilizing with the first rain we've had. Early September is a great time. And then also, you want to use something called a winter fertilizer, which a lot of people make mistakes too. They say, hey, I bought my winterizer and I used it. It's early September. What do I use next? Well, the winterizer is meant to be used after the grass stops growing. So you should fertilize using just a good high nitrogen fertilizer in September. But then for your winterizer, you want to wait till the grass stops growing. The last time you mow your lawn, which is probably around Thanksgiving or so, that's when you use the winterizer. And that's what really keeps the grass growing a little longer, but it really gets the grass off to a good start for next spring. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up, is that the winterizer should be used the last time you mow your lawn, and you use this stuff a little earlier, probably like in early September.
And again, you don't have to load it on the lawn.
You don't want to use too much. You always want to use the recommended rate, but if you're going to use a lot of fertilizer, you're better off doing it in the fall rather than the spring, because in the spring, the more fertilizer you put down, you're just going to be cutting the grass a lot more. And you are going to cut the grass a little more in the fall, but the more nitrogen you put down, that's actually what's going to thicken your roots up, as opposed to years ago. Again, the old timers thought that it was the phosphorus. That's why you always saw like 5, 10, 5, we'd sell stuff like that. That's not true. They found out years ago it's the nitrogen that thickens the roots up. Everybody thinks it's the phosphorus. The nitrogen in the fall thickens the roots up, so that's why you want to go with the high nitrogen fertilizer. And it could be any brand. It doesn't have to be the best. It just has to be a high nitrogen fertilizer
nitrogen.
compared to everything else.
And that's all we have. That's what we have to remember.
Yes, definitely.
Mike, I have had such a good time today. I really have. Of course, you know I love this place anyway. But, you know, you learn so much, so I hope all of you gain from it and enjoy the show. I'll see you all next month, and in the meantime, take care.